That is not entirely true because it looks like I'm going to become Chris Berman, like you can't get rid of me, like I'm supposed to retire and then I just keep hanging around because the Social Security Administration has not gotten back to me, and it's been like a month. So if I don't get my money, I'm not quitting. It could be July before they get back to me, from what I've heard. I don't know. So it might be another month or so.
Oh,
but anyway,
I love paperwork.
Can I do my impersonation of you while I'm on?
Yep. Hey, look, let's have some fun here. That's the whole purpose of it. Go ahead, let her
Kick
rip.
it in the middle. Out to Lundy. To kick to Lundy. To Funk on the rib. He said, this for the lead. Go on.
You're a better me than me.
Go on.
It's good. All right.
No, it's good.
Good.
You can't even do you.
No, I can't. I'm struggling.
When you were a little kid, did you ever listen to like WLS or some of those stations on the AM radio? You remember the guy in Chicago doing LaSalle?
Yeah, 50,000 watt stations. You could pick all that stuff.
Yeah. And he'd say, it's, and they had a promotion with some bread company, and he'd say, it's good, just like a loaf of vanilla bread.
Oh, goodness.
You never had to do that.
No, I've not. Nobody's even asked either, and I probably would say no, but that's all right.
No, you wouldn't. You all have to say yes.
Dave, what has it been like being as passionate about basketball as you are, and I am? What's it been like? Did you think that the basketball appetite in this state would change after decades, or are you surprised it's still where it is in this state?
Yes, I did, because I came from someplace where there is one. I came from the Midwest, and I thought the sport had simply been neglected, and it's a football school, and I thought, well, if they get a product that's exciting and fun, they'll come around. But we've seen, it's not like Penn State has had a lot of that, but we've seen little pockets of that sort of, I mean, last year, holy crap, last season was a lot of fun.
Yeah.
That team was fun. How many times did they take the blanket, the curtain off the upper deck? Like once?
Yeah.
So, yeah, I'm surprised, but now I've come to grips with the fact that the area is just immersed in contact sports. That's who it is, and it'll never be the Midwest. It won't, but that's what we have to deal with, right?
Yeah, no, I understand that. Is it going to be difficult once the time comes and the Social Security Administration sees it your way? Is it going to be difficult for you to step away from the world of opinion and hot takes, or is there a part of this that's going to be?
I'm sick of hearing my own voice, as many others are. I'm sick of reading my own words. Everyone's going to be surprised how easily, especially my wife Anna, who you've met.
Yes, Anna's great.
As easily as I'm going to assimilate into the world beyond this, because really we need a younger person needs to do it. You need to have a younger person with the passion, especially for Penn State football. I just don't have it anymore. Basketball was always my favorite sport. Yeah. I think that probably shone through to some extent, and I love telling stories, but as far as the day-to-day grind of covering a football season, I'm not interested anymore. I'm just not. And that for sure I'm not going to do again, even if my overdue retirement bleeds another couple of months into the future. I'm not going to be Chris Berman. I'm not coming back, and that's fine. I'm going to get used to it very easily. Yes.
What do you want to do? I mean, it could be nothing. It could be something. What would you like to do?
I wouldn't mind having a little job for bourbon money with some basketball program maybe around here. Mm-hmm. Or I think I'm probably going to be able to work on a contract basis for an operation around here called City of Basketball Love.
Okay.
Josh Verlin has done a wonderful job, and he actually sold it to the Enquirer. So I'm hoping to be able to write a few just game stories on local Big Five games, that kind of thing, for walking around money, and just to be involved in college basketball. And, if Mike Rhodes decides he's got a job for me up there, I'd do that.
Yeah. Hey.
If Pat Flannery gives me a gopher job where I got to go pick up recruits, go get this, someone to order around, do this, sweep that up, get this, get him, go pick him up. I'd do that, yeah.
Tell Steve Jones.
Be around a basketball program, that would be fun.
Tell Steve Jones that Dick Girardi, the plane leaves in 15 minutes.
Yeah, tell Girardi to move it.
Let's go.
Or we're
DJ.
leaving without him.
Let's go, DJ. For you, when you're cutting your teeth on all this, who really influenced you, Dave? I mean, you end up being your own man, but there's certain things along the way we all take from somebody else. Where did that come from for you?
The earliest guy was a guy named Dick Fenlon, who you probably never even heard of. He started out as a columnist in Louisville way back, covered Adolph Rupp and Joe B. Hall and those programs, and then came to Columbus when I was just starting at the Columbus Dispatch in the early 80s. Dick Oddie, the managing editor, who was the sports editor there, brought him in, and Dick became the managing editor. And Dick Fenlon was just a terrific columnist. He told stories and didn't take himself too seriously, put a little humor in it. He was the first guy I thought, man, that guy's cool, and he's got it. He's got the idea that we should take our job seriously, but not ourselves. Right. And Dick Fenlon was a terrific columnist. And then after that, I had contemporaries that I wanted to be Chris Dufresne at the LA Times. He was the epitome of a guy who, he could do things I could not do. He was more spare in his prose, understated, but told a story without falling over himself. Didn't want to be he was less of a columnist and more of just a great reporter. He told a great story. I don't know if you've ever read this, but in the 1997 tournament, the Chauncey Billups Colorado team beat Indiana, beat them bad, 80-62.
Ran them out.
Yeah, in Winston-Salem. And it was near the end of Knight's tenure there, and he was getting pissed off, and it was like the third to last year. And he was run out in 2000, so that was the third to last season. And Chris was out on, this is a legendary column among reporters. And Chris happened to be, you know how you are sometimes after the game, the media workroom will be right next to the loading dock. Yep. In those situations, underneath the arena, and the buses leave out of the loading dock for the teams. And Chris was like hanging around there for some reason and was just looking at stuff. Walked out and started talking to some of the guys on the loading dock who were actually workers at the arena in Winston-Salem, North Carolina, and said, did the Indiana team bus leave? And they said, yeah. And they said, somebody said that Knight wasn't on the bus. And Chris went, what? He said, yeah, he walked straight out the loading dock out to the main thoroughfare out there. And Chris got in his car. It's raining, by the way. It's just a miserable, rainy, cold night in Winston-Salem, North Carolina. Chris, just on a lark, thinks, well, maybe he's walking back to the team hotel. And these guys swore he didn't get on the bus, so what else could he do? It's like 3 miles away. He gets in his car and goes down the main drag of Winston-Salem through some not great areas, by the way. And there's Bob Knight walking down the sidewalk next to this like 4-lane main drag with his houndstooth hat pulled over his face, trudging back to the hotel. And Chris like doubled back just to make sure he'd seen what he thought he saw, but he didn't stop his car and like walk up and say, oh, hey coach, what are you doing out? He just told the story. And it's a great story. It's a great story. It's just a moment in that guy's career And that's the kind of guy I wanted to be that I never could be. Chris Dufresne was a terrific writer. He died of an aneurysm tragically, like a couple of years ago. And wonderful, wonderful guy.
Joe always had those get-togethers on Friday nights in Bud Tallman's room and so forth. And at Michigan State, when we all knew Ronnie Chris was going to retire, everybody got up and had to say something. And you, of course, being at the Patriot News with him, gave a very emotional speech. What was it about Ronnie that made that emotion come out, and what did you learn from him?
You forget. The real one was at Virginia.
Yeah.
Because that was 2001,
right.
And the game had been postponed because of 9/11.
Got moved back. Yeah.
Yeah,
that's right.
That was November. Yeah. It was
December.
November 30th,
it was December 1. It was December
2001.
Yeah.
And the game was on December 1st.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
And that's where it was.
Yeah.
And
yep.
Yeah. The funny part is I remember I kind of got choked up.
Yeah.
And I had to leave.
Yes, I remember.
Because I didn't get all the way through the speech.
Yep.
And because Ronnie was the mentor at the Patriot News, and a guy I'd been sitting next to for a long time. And I don't know, I get emotional in those things. I'm kind of like Roy Williams or Dick Bennett, where I get emotional in those situations.
But that's fine. That's called being.
Yeah, but the funny part was everyone sitting there, and Joe. I heard later Joe went, "What the hell just happened?"
That's exactly right. Because I was the one sitting next to Joe. Joe's like, "What the hell happened there?" It's like, I looked over. I said, Dave got overcome. He left. He goes, "Really?"
What the hell just happened? I thought he was going to say something. Let me call some people. I'll find out where he is.
Oh, good. No, but he looked over at me. That's what I said. Well, he said he got overcome with emotion. He goes, "Really?" It's like, okay.
Well, as if that was inconceivable, right?
Oh. But it's okay to be human, Dave. It's like, what the heck?
Yeah.
We all get emotional. My goodness.
I'm very emotional. Yeah. That's why I always got along great with Bill O'Brien, because we would, at any moment, we could rage into profanity-laced tirades.
Bill, okay, because Joe didn't swear. Okay, like I probably heard him say 5 or 6 ever in 32 years. Well, of course, Bill was 180 of that. So one day they're in practice, and he's it's like being in a sailor's locker room before the boat sails, right? and all of a sudden, and I'm just standing there, and he looks over, he says, "And if you don't like the swearing, you can leave." And I said, "No," I do basketball. He looked at me and goes, "That's why I like you."
I still have his classic rants on my tape recorder.
Oh, that's great.
I don't know if you've ever heard it, but I mean, it's amazing. It's amazing.
Well, DJ told me
the one where he's about to put his fist through the windshield.
Yeah.
It's amazing. Yeah.
Oh, how much have you picked up from DJ over the years? Because DJ Girardi loves basketball like no other.
Everything. He knows the game better than I do.
Yeah.
He sees the intricacies. He sees the little things during a game that make you look forward to what might happen, rather than saying the obvious crap that you already saw.
Right.
And I constantly I'm peppering him with looking for his opinion about things. And I do that with a lot of people, partly to check myself in what might be an entrenched opinion that's not entirely accurate, but also for his expertise, because he's got a ton of it. He really understands the geometry of the game, coaching adjustments, and not just the cliche crap that people say, in-game adjustments. Little stuff that coaches actually do to mitigate their weaknesses and accentuate their attributes of their team, because you got to do that. Almost everybody's team is imperfect, except maybe the teams at the very top, and they can just roll the ball out. But every other team, certainly Penn State teams, have had to make those little adjustments. And when coaches can do that, you think of what Micah Shrewsbury did last season, with just an amalgam of different guys from all over the place. He figured out a way for Jalen Pickett to run the team in a way that nobody had done here.
Yep.
It was very creative. It wasn't entirely new, but he certainly used Jalen Pickett's assets to the maximum degree. And that's what allowed them to accentuate their shooters and everything.
That's right.
I don't think anyone imagined that.
No.
But Micah Shrewsbury. Dick sees other things, all sorts of things. So he's constantly somebody I talk to and call and bug and badger and then argue with. See, he doesn't understand, and I guess it's completely understandable that he doesn't understand why I consult him and then I start arguing with him. Like, if you don't want to know what I'm talking about, then don't call me, But I can't help it. I argue with everybody.
But you know what? But people ask me about the broadcast part, and it's the same thing with Jack. And I've always made sure, consciously, that they have as much room as possible to talk and not the other way around. Because I think that those are the difference makers in the broadcast. Like, Dick's a difference maker. Fans learn more about the game when the game is over because of him. And that's why people say, well, sometimes there's 15 in the shot clock and you'll start talking. It's because what he's saying is important. I mean, it's just two guys watching basketball, two guys watching football. That's how we've always approached it.
Plus, he's easy on the ears.
Oh, God,
His delivery is that offhand, kind of casual.
Yep.
By the way, I just noticed this. Instead of the urgent, Joe Tessitore, everything is meaningful, kind of, those guys just get exhausting.
It's a 2-yard gain!
And Tessitore's, he's not the right example because he's not an analyst. How about Jesse Palmer?
Oh.
Guys like that never freaking shut up.
I know. It don't say anything. It don't say anything.
Right. Yeah, and just gargle crap, nonstop gibberish, and you just want him to shut up. That's never true of Dick.
Hey, Calipari's going to take the Arkansas job. I don't think it's totally surprising he's leaving Kentucky.
Yeah, what do you know?
Yeah, it's not totally surprising there, and I think people don't realize how much money is in Arkansas between Tyson Foods and Walmart, the Walton family, and so forth. But what do you think of today's climate, both in coaching salaries, NIL, and player movement?
Well, there has to be a point, like the Supreme Court, none other than Brett Kavanaugh has already said that college players are employees. Yeah. So that bridge has been crossed. It's a unanimous opinion. And so we need to progress quickly onto, and certain people who love college athletics abhor this idea, but we need to progress now. The more quickly we progress to a collective bargaining unit with the players, yes, a union, then we can set limits on NIL, legally set limits on NIL, the length of the portal, how often somebody can transfer. As long as those things are negotiated, there's no legal argument against them because a collective bargaining unit has agreed to them. Then everything's legal. That's the only way this Wild West is going to stop. And nobody likes it. Coaches hate it. But as far as the coaches bitching about it and complaining about the lack of loyalty, screw those people. Really, really. You're talking about coaches being disloyal? Are you kidding me? So, I know it's frustrating for fans. It's frustrating, and it's hurting the sport. It's hurting the continuity of men's basketball, especially.
Yeah.
And I think as the women's game grows, it'll hurt it too. I mean, Dawn Staley just put together a team full of 5 new faces, 5 new starters.
Yeah.
But would the game be better if there was more continuity, if there were players who stuck around 3 and 4 years, which they could do? They could get paid and stick around longer. The answer is just NIL and the portal. There has to be a cap on these things, and there could be. There can be if we move on it.
When I referred to Dave as my good friend, I mean it. Dave, thanks so much. Appreciate it. I had an absolute blast talking to you today, like I always do. Thanks so much.
Steve, it was good.
Dave Jones.
Bottles clinging and stuff, you'll know I'm in your neighborhood.
Yeah, exactly, because they already hit my street. So, Mark, what have you learned to this point about Penn State football between people you've talked to and also the opportunities you've had to see practice?
I just think the depth that we're seeing the last couple of years, Steve, has been unbelievable. I mean, when you look at what Penn State has lost to the NFL draft at key positions, take defensive end. And, they obviously they're going to have a first rounder in Chop, and I think Adisa did an unbelievable job for himself at the Combine and Pro Day. But then you look at what's coming back, and it's like, whoa. I mean, you add Abdul Carter to it. Denai Dennis Sutton was effectively a starter last year. Zariah Fisher, everything we're hearing is he's been one of the real standouts.
Yeah.
Amin Vanover's played a lot. Jameel Lyons is turning heads. Smith Vilbert's back in the mix. Jalen Harvey. I mean, so when you talk about depth, you're losing really good players to the NFL, and I think that's going to be one of the good things for Tom Allen. It's a similar situation at cornerback where, you lose 3 guys. I think all are going to have a really good shot to play in the NFL. Daquan Hardy maybe as a special teams type guy, but you look at what they're bringing back and how they were able to supplement through the transfer portal with A.J. Harris and Kimber, and it's just like, wow. I mean, so that's the one thing I think I think offensive tackle is another position. They lose their 2 starting tackles, and then you look at what they have coming back, even without Drew Shelton, who's been banged up. But you look at Donko, you look at Ono, you look at Javen Williams, you bring Nolan Rucci in there. I mean, I know I'm throwing a lot of names out, but it wasn't that long ago that they didn't have this kind of quality depth. And I just think when you're a team that wants to fight to be in that playoff, which is going to be expanded now, and wants to fight to be a Big Ten champion, which is expanded now, and wants to be involved in all these things, quality depth is key, and I think they have it.
So you've talked about what Tom Allen's doing defensively. You mentioned Carter going to defensive end. I think a lot of people pretty much know how Tom likes to play because they've seen it year after year. But what about Andy Koltonicki? What have you learned on that side of the ball as to how he wants to play based on the personnel he has at Penn State?
Yeah, I mean, just from an X's and O's perspective, what Drew Aller has told us is they're doing a lot more quick things right before and right after the snap. It sounded almost as if they thought they were maybe getting a little bit stale last year and people were figuring out what they were going to do. But the thing that has stood out to me about Andy, and I don't want this to come across the wrong way, but listen, when an offensive coordinator is fired during the season, is let go during the season, that's a pretty good indication that there was a lack of communication kind of all around. And everything we're hearing about Andy and everything we get in talking to Andy, this guy is an unbelievable communicator. And I think that's half the battle as a coach. One thing that Drew Aller said when we had a chance to talk to him during winter workouts, 2 things he said. One was that Koltonicki would hit them with pop quizzes, the quarterbacks, just out of nowhere in Lash Building. So that's like, okay, he wants to keep the communication flowing. But the other thing, Steve, that really stood out to me, he said Andy Koltonicki would go to the quarterbacks and other players and say, hey, what do you think is going to work?
Right.
What do you like? And then, now he didn't take every one of those ideas and implement it, but he listened. He was a sounding board, and he could then explain, okay, well, maybe we could use this element of that, or maybe this is why this doesn't work. But to me, that's huge. And then I think you just see his dynamic in practice, where he's in the middle of everything. And I know you're at more practices than I am, but listen, for people who haven't been to football practice, I don't want to shock you, but you may hear some profanity every once in a while. And this guy is dropping F-bombs left and right. And I don't mean that in a bad way. I mean in a motivational type way. And he's in the middle of drills, whacking people with pads, and he's yelling at the running backs. And he's and I don't think we saw that with Mike Yurcich as much. I don't think we saw the interaction. So to me, Steve, as much as X's and O's are going to be important, I think that level of communication is, we've already seen it, and I think it's only going to get better and better and better.
They're swearing in practice. Okay.
A little bit. Well, you know, Steve, you know that there are some people who might hear that and be a little bit offended. But
I know.
For somebody like me, obviously, it's not really a problem.
I told the story the other day. I'll tell you. Back when Bill O'Brien came in, Joe didn't swear. Okay.
Right.
Just that's and that was Joe's standard. And he didn't do it. So Bill O'Brien, of course, was and is. Great guy, but at the same time should be pointed out that he would throw some colorful language out there. So one day they're practicing. They did something wrong. He's mad. He starts throwing language out there, and then he looks over at me and he says, "If you don't like the swearing, you can leave." And I said, "No, I do basketball."
Right, exactly. You're courtside, or when you are courtside, not necessarily at the Jordan Center, but when you are courtside, you tend to hear a lot of that. So, hey, there's a really funny story, Steve, if I could tell it, but it was with Craig Fitzgerald.
Yep.
His first couple of years as Penn State strength coach. I think it was the first year, second year, and I got to know him really well because he went to high school with Keith Conlon, who I'm friends with.
Sure.
And he was. So they did a workout that they allowed us to videotape, and there was a lot of profanity in that. And I said, "Hey, do you mind if I post this?" And he's like, "No, go ahead." So I posted, and one person complained about the profanity.
Right.
So he calls me. He's like, "Oh, Mark, maybe you should take that down." And I'm like, "Craig, Fitz, I got to tell you, one person complained, 8,000 people are like, I love this guy."
Right.
So I'm like, let me see if I can edit it a little bit. And we get off the phone, and 5 minutes later he goes, "You know what, Mark? Bleep it. Just leave it up." And so that video is up there somewhere in cyberspace to this day.
The blue-white game will be the 15th practice. So this will be practice 12 today, 13 on Thursday, 14 Friday, then 15 Saturday. What, if anything, are you looking for in this, especially in the first half?
I'm anxious, and I'm going to ask James about this today. I don't know if you have any insight on it, but, he had mentioned earlier in the spring that this is going to be the first time in a while that they'll have enough players to actually have something resembling an actual game, rather than the modified type scrimmages they've been doing. And I would just love to see that. I went and counted today because I was obviously had too much time on my hands, but 124 players on the roster right now.
Yeah.
And a lot of that is owed to all the players who enrolled mid-year and the transfers who came in mid-year. That used to not be the case. I mean, you used to have a really depleted roster before this started to happen. So I think if they're able to have some kind of semblance of a game, I think that's going to be key. But otherwise, I think it's important to keep an eye on those young offensive linemen that I mentioned, and a guy like Cooper Cousins, who apparently, is just tearing it up for a true freshman, which is unheard of,
right,
for an early enrollee. And then over on defense, I think the positions that I was talking about, when you lose so many players to the NFL, how are things going to shake down at defensive end, and how are they going to shake down at cornerback? Tom Allen, he didn't have these problems at Indiana,
no,
where you almost have too much talent at defensive end. he told you know enough about his scheme out there where he had the two specialty positions, the Husky, which is now called the Lion, which is like a defensive back hybrid type thing, and then the Bull, which was a defensive end linebacker hybrid. So he explained the Husky/Lion to us at the media availability, and I said, well, what about the Bull? Are you going to implement that? He goes, we really don't have to, because the defensive ends here are athletic enough that they can do all the things that we were asking of that position, which includes dropping into coverage, moving all around, a lot of different things that Manny Diaz did with the defensive end. But it just goes to show you the difference in talent level. And now his challenges are going to be much different now.
Right.
And fortunately, he has a very experienced staff. And, James Franklin has a very experienced defensive staff. You know what those guys on that side of the ball are like, including a guy like Deion Barnes, who's, relatively young, but has been with the program for multiple years now, to help him make all those decisions.
Right, and it's interesting because that's what I find interesting about Abdul Carter. We saw how good Adisa Isaac was, and I think it's going to be a big benefit to him at the next level when Penn State would run zone blitzes, because he knew how to drop into the right zone, the proper depth of a drop. Jack and I talked about it in the broadcast all the time. Having a guy that had been playing linebacker, now playing defensive end, I think allows you to keep that thought process in there.
Right. And then, Steve, it's a 250-pound guy. So you're not looking at – and that's where that hybrid thing came into play at Indiana, where that was probably going to be like a 225-pound guy.
Right, exactly.
And that's a whole different thing, because then they know what you're going to do. I mean, if you're bringing that guy in, you're probably going to drop him into coverage, right? Whereas with Abdul Carter, you don't know if he's coming off the edge. You don't know if he's dropping into coverage. You don't know what the heck he's doing. And he's not the only defensive end who's that athletic. I mean, I know I mentioned him earlier, but I am just telling people, watch out for Jameel Lyons. I don't know that he's going to be a starter this year, but I think that guy has big time written all over him. I mean, he has so much talent that I don't know that he's going to be a starter this year, but I think he's going to be really, really good as time goes by.
What kind of read have you had to this point on the quarterbacks?
Yeah, I mean, I think it goes back to you're sensing more of a comfort level, at least from Drew Aller. I haven't had a chance to talk to Bo, so I can't speak on what his kind of feel for things are. But in terms of Drew, we had an opportunity to speak to him last week. I almost said last week on a Zoom call. And I just think the level of comfort and confidence he seems to have working with Andy Koldalnicki seems to be at a little bit different level than maybe it was with Yersich. And, I'm hearing nothing but good things about Grunkemeyer. Obviously there's don't think we're going to see Smolik. Obviously I think there's some things going on there physically. But I think they're in a good spot with, I guess the question is going to be, Steve, is, are they going to be willing to use Bo as a change of pace type quarterback, which they did a little bit late last year. And I think if you go and you look at what Andy Kotelnicki has done in the past and the different types of quarterbacks he's been able to work with, I mean, I think that's one of his strengths, is that he's been very successful with multiple different kinds of quarterbacks, whether pure drop back or more mobile guys. And will it be a situation where he finds a way? I mean, that's one thing he said. He was asked specifically about Bo Pribula, and he'd spoken more general terms. And he said basically, and I'm paraphrasing because I don't have the quote right here in front of me.
Sure.
If we think somebody could help us win, we're going to find a way to get them on the field. He said, if that means playing 8 tailbacks, I'll play 8 tailbacks. I mean, he was being facetious, obviously, right. But making the point that, so that's what I think is going to be interesting. They're not going to tip their hand in the blue-white game to that sort of thing.
Sure.
But I think when we get to fall camp and when we get to that season opener at West Virginia, how are they going to use Bo Pribula? Will they do it? Because he obviously brings a different skill set than Drew Aller.
All right, and the basketball season wrapped up last night. We are now into portal season and have been into portal season for a couple of weeks now. When you look at Penn State to this point, based on the season they had, and the needs, especially in a league that's going to bring in 4 new schools. What's your thoughts on where Mike Rhodes is right now with the team?
Well, I think it was important to get the big guy from Xavier, obviously, given who they lost. And, they have another big guy coming in as a true freshman, but I think they still need to get, a little bit more size. We saw last year, what happened when you don't have enough big men. And one of them, they were already a little bit, not quite where they needed to be in terms of guys who can come in and make an impact. And then Meach gets hurt, and now you're in a really difficult spot. And I think at VCU, you can get by with that. In the Big Ten, you can't. The big men are just way, way, way too good. And so I think developing depth there is going to be really important. I think making sure that everybody else stays is very, very important as well. But to me, making sure I don't want to say it's easy to get smaller players who are really good, but I think it's easier than getting skilled big. So I think being able to get at least one more guy there would be really important for this team.
Right. Have you invested any time yet in the 4 schools coming in football and basketball, or is it just been a time where you're so locked into what Penn State is currently doing that you'll file that for a little bit later?
Yeah, it's been tough, Steve. And I'm to the point now where we're starting to make travel plans, and I'm just like dreading making those plans for USC. It's like, oh my God. Yep. I used to think going to Wisconsin was bad. And now I have to figure out a way to get to USC and back in time to tape our TV show. So I just haven't been able to dive into that just yet. I think after spring practice is going to be a good time to do that. And obviously with those teams out there, I don't know. You had some major coaching shakeups with those teams, with several of those teams. So I don't know. You're not really going to be able to look back at last year, I don't think, and figure out, what USC or what UCLA is going to be, or what Washington's going to be. That's something I think after spring practice we'll dive into.
Yeah, no, I completely understand that. You mentioned what you might talk to him about tonight in practice. Dev, do you know who you're getting besides James tonight?
We are getting Ty Howell. We are getting Terry Smith. And Dawkins. Yeah, so I think that's going to be cool to talk to Doc. He's one guy, Steve, I want to give a shout out to because, this because you're around the program. But from the time he was pretty young, people pointed to him as a leader in this program.
Yep.
And I think people who know what his dad was kind of all about understand where his personality comes from. I think a lot of it comes from his mom, too, who's an outgoing personality. Yep. But I just think it's a situation where I would keep an eye out for Nick Dawkins. I think he's, they're sizing him up as a guy who's going to take over for Hunter Norzad. I think Cooper Cousins will probably push him, but I just think the leadership skills and the personality and the glue guy stuff and all those good things, I just think he's a guy to keep a focus on. I'm glad you brought that up because I wanted to mention him. And then the other players are A.J. Harris and Denai Dennis Sutton, and I think there may be one more. I'm not sure, but so it's a good group. And listen, hey, I want to really thank Penn State for having these availabilities. James Franklin met with a few of us a couple years ago and said, what would the best way, what would help you guys in terms of doing coverage? And, one of the things that was brought up from several reporters is having face-to-face access with players, even if it's after practice. And I think it's just been tremendous. And then making the coaches available was great. Making the transfer players available last week and A.J. Harris this week was great. So we've had a lot of good access this spring, and we didn't always have that, okay? And I think every once in a while, a lot of times people, including me, complain about access, but I think sometimes when things actually go right, you got to take a second and say, you know what, I appreciate this. So I do appreciate it, and I think most reporters appreciate the access that we've had.
Well, appreciate the great work you do, Mark. Thanks so much, and thanks for all the time today. Appreciate it, and good luck with the recycling.
Absolutely. You'll hear. I'm glad it didn't rattle too much when we were on the air here, and I'll look forward to seeing you later at practice, Steve.
Thanks, Mark.